The fluorescent lights of St. Augustine Medical Center hummed their eternal song as October rain drummed against the windows. Room 302 had been occupied for exactly 11 days by a woman who rarely spoke, rarely ate, and spent most of her time staring at legal documents spread across her hospital bed like a paper fortress. Catherine Morrison was dying. The brain scan images told a story her doctors delivered with clinical precision. An inoperable tumor, growing, inevitable. 6 months, they said. Maybe less. She'd demanded honesty, and they'd given it to her with the detached professionalism that comes from delivering bad news too many times. At 42 years old, Catherine had built Morrison Financial Group from nothing into one of Boston's most respected investment firms. She'd negotiated billion-dollar deals, sat on 3 corporate boards, and had been featured in Forbes twice. Her corner office overlooked the harbor. Her penthouse had floor-to-ceiling windows. Her life was, by any measurable standard, a success. And she was going to die completely alone. No husband, no children, no siblings. Her only brother had cut ties years ago after she'd missed his wedding for a merger meeting. Her parents were gone, lost to a car accident when she was 25, before she'd learned how to say, "I love you," without attaching conditions. The irony wasn't lost on her. All those years building an empire, and she had no one to leave it to except strangers and charities whose names she'd picked from a list her attorney had thoughtfully provided. "Ms. Morrison?" A nurse poked her head in, her voice artificially bright. "We're moving a new patient into 304 next door. Just wanted to let you know it might be a bit noisy." Catherine nodded without looking up from the will she was reviewing. Noise didn't matter. Nothing really mattered anymore. But what she didn't know was that in approximately 47 minutes, everything was about to change. Thomas Chun was exhausted in the way only single parents understand. Bone deep, soul tired, running on fumes and desperation. His 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, lay in his arms as he navigated the hospital corridor. Her breathing shallow and labored despite the oxygen mask covering her small face. Acute pneumonia, the doctors had said. Complications from her chronic asthma. She needed to be admitted, monitored, given 4 antibiotics and respiratory therapy. Thomas had nodded through the explanation, mentally calculating costs he couldn't afford, juggling work schedules that couldn't be rearranged, and trying to remember the last time he'd slept more than 4 hours in a night. "Room 304, the nurse said, leading them to a small room that smelled of antiseptic and artificial lemon. "I know it's not the pediatric floor, but we're full tonight. You'll be more comfortable here. It's quieter, and there's a pull-out couch for you." As they settled Sophie into bed, Thomas noticed the partially open door to the adjacent room. Through the gap, he could see a woman sitting ramrod straight in her hospital bed, surrounded by papers, her face illuminated by a laptop screen. She looked like she was working, which seemed absurd given their surroundings. Sophie's coughing fit shattered the quiet, harsh and wet, her small body convulsing with the effort. Thomas held her, whispering reassurances he wasn't sure he believed, rubbing circles on her back like his wife used to do before the divorce, before everything fell apart. When the fit finally subsided, Sophie lay back against the pillows, exhausted. Her eyes, though, were alert, curious in the way children remain even when sick. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice raspy. "That lady next door. She's crying." Thomas looked toward the adjacent room. He couldn't see the woman's face from this angle, but something about the set of her shoulders, the way she held herself so rigidly still, suggested Sophie might be right. "She's probably just having a hard day, baby. But she's alone." Sophie's eyes filled with the kind of empathy that always caught Thomas off guard. How had he and his ex-wife, 2 people who could barely stand to be in the same room anymore, created someone so innately kind? Before he could respond, Sophie was struggling to sit up, her small hand reaching for something on her bedside table. It was Mr. Buttons, her stuffed elephant, worn soft from years of love, missing one eye and repaired in 3 places with mismatched thread. We should give her Mr. Buttons, Sophie said with the absolute certainty children have when they know something is right. He makes sad people feel better. Sweetheart, you need Mr. Buttons. And that lady is a stranger. Daddy, you always say that when people are hurting, we help them. You say that's what Mama would want us to do. The invocation of her mother, Thomas's ex-wife Jennifer, who'd remarried and moved to California, hit him like a physical blow, because Sophie was right. Those were his words, his values, passed down from parents who'd taught him that kindness was never wasted. Okay, he heard himself say, but I'll come with you. They approached room 302 slowly, Sophie clutching Mr. Buttons, Thomas's hand on her shoulder. He knocked gently on the doorframe. The woman looked up, and Thomas saw that Sophie had been right. Her eyes were red, her cheeks wet with tears she'd been crying silently. When she saw them, she quickly wiped her face, composing herself with practiced efficiency. I'm so sorry to disturb you, Thomas began. My daughter just wanted to. You look sad, Sophie interrupted with the bluntness only children can achieve without offense. My daddy says everyone needs a friend when they're sad. And Mr. Buttons is really good at being a friend. She held out the stuffed elephant. Its one remaining eye gazing at Catherine with what might have been wisdom or might have been Sophie's projection of it. Catherine stared at the offering, then at the little girl with oxygen tubing still in her nose, at the father in rumpled clothes who looked like he was holding himself together through sheer willpower. I can't take your elephant, she managed, her voice rough with disuse and emotion. It's not forever, Sophie assured her. Just until you feel better. Mr. Buttons has special powers. He's been with me since I was born, and he's helped me through really scary stuff. Something in Catherine's chest cracked. A fissure in the carefully constructed wall she'd built around her heart. This child, this sick child who clearly needed comfort herself, was offering her most precious possession to a complete stranger. What kind of special powers? Catherine asked, surprised to find herself playing along. Sophie's face lit up despite her obvious exhaustion. He's a really good listener, and when you hug him, he reminds you that you're not alone. And he's been to the hospital lots of times, so he knows all about being brave when you're scared. Thomas watched the woman's facade crumble. She reached out with shaking hands and accepted Mr. Buttons, holding the worn elephant like it was made of glass. Thank you, Catherine whispered. Thank you. What's your name? Sophie asked, settling cross-legged at the foot of Catherine's bed as if they were old friends. Thomas moved to stop her, but something held him back. Catherine, I'm Sophie. This is my dad, Thomas. He's a teacher, and he makes really good pancakes, and he always knows what to say when I'm scared. Catherine looked at Thomas, really looked at him, seeing past the exhaustion to the gentle strength underneath. A teacher. High school English, Thomas confirmed, settling into the visitor's chair. Though right now I feel more like a full-time worrier. Sophie has pneumonia, Catherine observed. It wasn't a question. Complicated by asthma. She'll be okay, the doctors are good here. But it's... Thomas trailed off, not sure how to articulate the fear that lived in his chest every time Sophie struggled to breathe. Terrifying, Catherine finished. Even when the doctors say she'll be fine. Because nothing they say can make you stop imagining the worst. Their eyes met, and Thomas saw recognition there, the understanding of someone who knew what it meant to be afraid. Are you sick too? Sophie asked with characteristic directness. Thomas winced. Sophie, that's not. It's okay. Catherine set her laptop aside, giving Sophie her full attention. Yes, I'm very sick. The doctors say there's nothing they can do. The words hung in the air. Sophie processed this with the solemn consideration children give to serious truths. That's really sad, she said finally. Do you have family to help you be less scared? No. No family. Everyone needs family, Sophie declared. That's what my daddy always says. He says family is people who show up when things are hard. Thomas felt his throat tighten. Those were his words, spoken during countless bedtime conversations about why Mommy lived far away now, about how their small family of 2 was still whole, still enough. Your daddy sounds very wise, Catherine said softly. He is, and he's really good at showing up. Sophie yawned, her energy depleting rapidly. Maybe we could be your show-up people while we're here. Would that be okay? Catherine looked at this child, at her father, at the stuffed elephant in her hands. When was the last time anyone had offered her anything without wanting something in return? When was the last time anyone had cared whether she was afraid? I would like that very much, she managed, her voice breaking on the last word. Over the next 3 days, while Sophie recovered, an unlikely bond formed between rooms 302 and 304. Thomas found himself spending hours in Catherine's room, talking about everything and nothing. She told him about growing up in foster care, about clawing her way through business school on scholarships and spite, about building her company with a desperate need to prove she mattered. I thought if I was successful enough, powerful enough, that would fill the empty spaces, she admitted one evening. But it turns out you can have everything and still feel completely hollow inside. Thomas shared his own story. A marriage that had crumbled under the weight of his wife's postpartum depression and his inability to fix it. The custody arrangement that gave him Sophie most of the time but left him terrified he wasn't enough. The constant juggling of bills and responsibilities and love that never felt like it stretched far enough. But you have Sophie, Catherine said, watching through the open doors as the little girl colored in her hospital bed. You have someone who needs you. That's everything. It is, Thomas agreed. But sometimes everything feels impossibly heavy. Catherine studied him. How do you do it? How do you keep going when you're exhausted and scared and barely holding it together? Because giving up isn't an option when someone needs you to be strong. Because Sophie deserves a father who fights for her, even when he's tired. Because, he paused, searching for the right words. Because love multiplies effort. It doesn't make things easier, but it makes them worth it. Something shifted in Catherine's expression. I've never had that. Never had someone who needed me to be strong. Never felt like my existence mattered beyond profit margins and quarterly reports. It matters to Sophie, Thomas said quietly. She asks about you every morning. Wants to know if Mr. Buttons is helping you feel braver. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. That little girl. She just gave me her most treasured possession. Why? Because she saw someone hurting and wanted to help. That's who she is. Thomas leaned forward. Catherine, you say you have nothing to fight for, but Sophie believes you're fighting. She believes Mr. Buttons is helping you be brave. Don't you think that matters? The question lodged itself in Catherine's chest like a seed. Sophie was discharged on day 4, but they didn't leave. Thomas made excuses. Paperwork to complete, follow-up instructions to understand. But the truth was simpler. They couldn't abandon Catherine to her solitude. That evening, Thomas brought dinner from the hospital cafeteria. Nothing fancy, just sandwiches and soup, and the 3 of them ate together in room 302. Sophie chattered about her favorite books, about the guinea pig her class was raising, about how she wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. Catherine listened with the intensity of someone memorizing every word, every gesture, every precious moment. Catherine, Sophie said suddenly, setting down her soup spoon. Are you going to die soon? Sophie. Thomas's voice was sharp with horror. It's okay, Catherine said, her hand finding Sophie's across the bed. Yes, sweetheart. The doctors say I probably only have a few months. Sophie nodded slowly, processing. That's not very long to do all the important stuff. No, it's not. Then we should make a list. Sophie's eyes brightened with the enthusiasm of problem-solving. Of all the things you want to do, and maybe we can help you do some of them. Catherine felt something break open inside her chest. Not the painful breaking of loss, but the expansive breaking of possibility. I don't. I don't know what would be on that list, she admitted. I've spent so long working. I forgot to think about living. Sophie grabbed a piece of paper and a crayon from her bag. Okay, let's think. What have you never done that you wanted to do? The question hung in the air. Catherine's mind, so quick with financial projections and market analyses, went blank. I've never. She started, then stopped. I've never had a birthday cake. With candles. People singing. Sophie's eyes went wide. Never? Not even when you were little. Foster homes don't always do birthdays. And later, I was always too busy. When's your birthday? Thomas asked gently. December 12th. 2 months away. Sophie wrote carefully on her paper. Birthday party with cake and candles. What else? She prompted. Slowly, haltingly, Catherine began to speak. Small things, achingly simple things. Eating ice cream for breakfast, watching a sunrise, learning to bake cookies. Reading a book just for pleasure, seeing the ocean, having someone call just to check on her. Hearing, I love you, from someone who meant it. The list grew. Sophie wrote each item with careful concentration, her tongue poking out slightly as she formed the letters. When they finished, Catherine stared at the paper covered in crayon. A roadmap to a life she'd never lived but desperately wanted in whatever time remained. We'll help you, Sophie announced with absolute certainty. Right, Daddy? Thomas met Catherine's eyes, saw the vulnerability and hope warring there, and felt his heart make a decision his head was still catching up to. Right, he confirmed. We'll help you do every single thing on this list. What followed were the most intense, beautiful weeks of Catherine's life. Thomas arranged for her to be discharged to a rehabilitation facility, then to a small apartment near their home. He took unpaid leave from teaching, depleting his meager savings but unable to imagine doing anything else. They started with the small things. Ice cream for breakfast, eaten while watching the sun rise from Catherine's apartment balcony. Thomas taught her to bake cookies. The kitchen ended up dusted with flour and the first batch burned, but Catherine actually laughed, for the first time in months. They drove to the coast on a crisp November morning. Catherine stood on the beach, breathing salt air, watching waves crash against rocks, and felt more alive than she had in years. Sophie read her favorite books aloud, curled against Catherine's side like they'd known each other forever. Catherine discovered she loved fantasy novels, stories where magic was real and good always triumphed. Thomas's friends, teachers and parents from Sophie's school, began to orbit around them, bringing meals, offering company, treating Catherine like she'd always been part of their community. She found herself invited to game nights and book clubs, included in group texts about nothing important, called just to chat. The experience was overwhelming. All these people showing up for her simply because Thomas and Sophie cared about her. No transactions. No business value. Just human connection freely given. I don't understand, she told Thomas one evening after a particularly boisterous dinner party at her apartment. Why are all these people being so kind? They don't even know me. They know you matter to us, Thomas said simply. That's enough. That's how community works when you let it. Catherine felt tears streaming down her face. I've wasted so much time. No. Thomas took her hand. You survived the only way you knew how. But now you're learning a different way. It's never too late to learn. December arrived with unexpected snow. Catherine's strength was waning. She tired easily, her balance was off, her headaches more frequent. But on December 12th, she woke to find Thomas and Sophie at her door, along with 15 other people from their extended community. Her apartment had been transformed. Balloons, streamers, a banner proclaiming, "Happy Birthday, Catherine," and in the center of the dining table, a cake. 3 layers, chocolate with vanilla frosting, decorated with 43 candles. Sophie had insisted on 1 extra, for good luck. Catherine stood in the doorway, unable to speak, as these people, her people, she realized with shock, sang happy birthday with enthusiasm and terrible harmony. "Make a wish," Sophie urged as Catherine approached the blazing candles. Catherine looked around the room. At Thomas, whose quiet strength had shown her what real courage looked like. At Sophie, who'd taught her that kindness was the bravest thing of all. At these friends who'd embraced her simply because she'd let them. She closed her eyes and blew out the candles, wishing not for more time, though she wanted that desperately, but for the courage to live whatever time remained with this same openness, this same love. The party lasted hours. There were games and laughter and stories. Catherine opened presents, small, thoughtful things that showed people had paid attention to who she was becoming. A journal for writing down her thoughts. Cozy blanket. A collection of fantasy novels. A framed photo of her, Thomas, and Sophie from their beach trip. As the evening wound down and guests began leaving, Catherine felt exhausted but incandescently happy. "Did you have a good birthday?" Sophie asked, climbing into Catherine's lap despite being almost too big for it. "The best birthday of my entire life," Catherine said truthfully, holding the girl close. The weeks that followed were harder. Catherine's symptoms progressed. She needed a walker, then a wheelchair. The headaches became migraines that left her nauseated and disoriented. But she wasn't alone. Thomas moved into her spare bedroom, taking on the role of caregiver with the same quiet competence he brought to everything. Sophie did her homework at Catherine's bedside, reading essay questions aloud and asking Catherine's opinion on her answers. "You know," Catherine said one difficult afternoon, her words slightly slurred for medication, "I used to think dying alone meant dying without people physically present, but that's not what it means at all." Thomas looked up from his book. No. Dying alone means dying without anyone caring that you're gone. Dying without making a difference in anyone's life. Dying without love." She reached for his hand. "I'm not dying alone. Not anymore." Thomas felt tears streaming down his face. "No, you're not. Thomas, I need to tell you something." Catherine's words were careful, measured. "I've updated my will. The business goes to my executive team, they've earned it. But everything else, my investments, the real estate, all of it, it goes into a trust for Sophie. For her education, her future, whatever she needs." "Catherine, no. Please." Her grip on his hand tightened. "Let me do this. Let me matter. You and Sophie gave me a family when I'd given up on having one. Let me take care of her future the way you've taken care of my present. You don't have to give us anything. You've already given us everything. I know I don't have to. I want to. Thomas, you're a teacher making barely enough to survive. I'm a CEO with more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. Let me do this one thing. Let me make a difference for the person who made the biggest difference in my life." Thomas wept openly, his shoulders shaking. Catherine pulled him close, this man who'd shown her what love looked like in action. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for letting us love you. Thank you for teaching me how." Catherine made it to Christmas. Thomas and Sophie decorated her apartment with lights and a small tree, and she watched Sophie open presents with the joy unique to 8-year-olds who still believe in magic. "I got you something too," Catherine said, pulling out a carefully wrapped box. Sophie tore it open to find a new stuffed elephant. Pristine, both eyes intact, soft and perfect. "I wanted to give you back Mr. Buttons," Catherine explained, "but I thought maybe you'd like him to have a friend. Someone who could keep him company and remember the adventures you all had at the hospital." Sophie hugged the new elephant, then Catherine, then ran to get Mr. Buttons from her bag. "This is Mrs. Patches," she announced, naming the new elephant instantly. "Mr. Buttons, this is your new friend. Catherine gave her to us so we'd always remember her." The simple acceptance of mortality in her words, "remember her," made Thomas's breath catch. 3 days after Christmas, Catherine slipped into unconsciousness. Thomas and Sophie maintained their vigil, reading aloud, playing music, telling stories. The hospital bed had been moved into her living room, surrounded by photos and flowers and evidence of a life well lived in its final months. On December 31st, as fireworks announced the new year across the city, Catherine took her last breath. Thomas held one hand, Sophie the other, and they said goodbye to someone who'd started as a stranger but ended as family. The funeral was standing room only. Catherine's business colleagues came, shocked to see the CEO they'd known revealed as someone who'd been deeply loved. Thomas's community filled the pews, celebrating a woman they'd known for mere months but who'd impacted them profoundly. Sophie gave the eulogy. Thomas had offered, but she'd insisted. Catherine taught me that family isn't just people you're born with, Sophie said, her voice clear despite her tears. It's people who show up when things are hard, who stay even when it would be easier to leave, who love you not because they have to, but because they choose to. She held up Mr. Buttons and Mrs. Patches. When I gave Catherine Mr. Buttons, I thought I was helping her. But really, she was helping me. She taught me that being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about choosing love even when you know it's going to hurt. In the months that followed, Thomas and Sophie slowly rebuilt their routine. But everything was different. The trust Catherine had established meant financial security they'd never known. Thomas could focus on teaching without constant money stress. Sophie could have opportunities he'd only dreamed of providing. But more than that, their entire community had shifted. Catherine's generosity had sparked something. A foundation was established in her name, supporting single parents facing medical crises, providing resources and community for people facing terminal illness alone. On the first anniversary of Catherine's death, Thomas and Sophie returned to St. Augustine Medical Center. They'd arranged with the hospital to visit room 302, which now had a small plaque, in memory of Catherine Morrison, who taught us that family is built on showing up. A new patient occupied the room, an elderly woman, alone, staring out the window with hollow eyes. Sophie didn't hesitate. She walked right in, Mr. Buttons in hand. "Hi," she said with the confidence of a 9-year-old who'd learned that kindness was never wasted. "You look like you could use a friend." Thomas watched from the doorway as his daughter offered the same gift they'd been given. The gift of showing up, of caring, of proving that no one had to face their darkest moments alone. The woman accepted Mr. Buttons with shaking hands, and Thomas saw Catherine's legacy continuing, rippling outward in circles of compassion that would never end. Because that was the thing about love Catherine had taught them. It didn't end when someone died. It multiplied, spreading from heart to heart, stranger to stranger, transforming everyone it touched. Room 302 would never just be a hospital room again. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected places. That dying doesn't have to mean dying alone. That family is something you build, not something you're born with. And that sometimes a little girl with a stuffed elephant can change the entire world, one act of kindness at a time. 6 months later, on what would have been Catherine's 44th birthday, Thomas received a letter from her attorney. Inside was a note in Catherine's handwriting, written during her last conscious days. "Dear Thomas and Sophie, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But I want you to know that the time I had with you wasn't borrowed. It was the first time in my life I was truly living. You didn't save me from dying. You saved me from never having lived at all. Use the resources I've left wisely. Help other families the way you helped me. Teach Sophie that wealth isn't measured in money, but in the people who show up when it matters. I've set aside a special fund to be accessed only once, on Sophie's 21st birthday. Inside you'll find letters I wrote to her, one for each year until she's my age. Things I wished someone had told me, dreams I have for her, reminders that she changed a life simply by offering a stuffed elephant to a crying stranger. Thank you for giving me a family. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for teaching me in my final months what my entire life should have been about. With love that never ends, Catherine." P.S. Mr. Buttons belongs with Sophie now. But I hope she keeps using him to help people who need reminding that they're not alone. Thomas read the letter to Sophie that night, both of them crying and laughing as Catherine's voice reached across death to remind them one more time. Showing up matters. Love matters. And family, chosen, built, created through acts of deliberate kindness, matters most of all.